You think about when Oxford was created 1,000 years ago. You had to go to Oxford to learn from the head of the professor or from the library book. That's because information was scarce. Today, we live in a world where information is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So what that means is that uh, human beings can teach themselves so much more than, so today, a young African child with a mobile phone has access to more information on that phone than someone who was doing a PhD at Oxford 30 years ago. And human beings have always been natural learners. Just think about it. There is no curriculum that teaches a baby how to crawl or how to walk or a language. They learn by themselves. And then yet when we go to school, we begin taking away that natural ability, and we make children more and more dependent on the teacher. So what we have to do is realize actually that we are natural learners, and let's get young people to recognize and go back to their natural ability to learn by themselves, using the technology, using the information that is available, so that they can learn these skills very quickly. It's not about having to build new universities in Africa or having to train thousands of professors and teachers, because we don't have time to do that. We have less than 15 years to create, to get 1 billion jobs in Africa. So we need to do things very unconventionally, and we are doing much of this in the African Leadership Group. We have developed programs where within 6 months or a year, we're producing people who can get jobs at some of the top companies in Africa and in the world. And it just starts by thinking differently about how learning works, how education works, what today's world allows us to do, which has not been done before. And we need to stop doing the same, regular things, because we won't get there using conventional methods.
This does presuppose that there is access to decent broadband. South Korea in the 1990s, I believe, took the decision to invest heavily in broadband, and I don't think they regret it. How close do you think are African governments to understanding that genuine investment in fiber and other ways of getting broadband around the country is just essential?
Well, I think we're definitely not. I mean, some countries have understood this and are making those investments. I think Rwanda is a great example. Kenya is a great example, and others have not. And hopefully, this moment will be a wake-up call for African governments to realize that if they want to compete, they need to really invest in broadband and really create the information superhighway that will allow as many of their citizens to get access to so many services that they have been struggling to provide as government. So, it's not just education, but it's e-health. It's access to global markets. There's so many things that get opened up if we can create broadband access. One of the things that I love in China is the whole, Taobao villages that exist, where entire villages are able to specialize in different products and services. So this village specializes in cashews. That village specializes in manufacturing leather shoes. This village factory specializes in making uniforms. And within the village, there isn't necessarily high levels of literacy, but there may be 1 or 2 people there who know how to use a computer, who can take pictures of the products and services that they sell, that they make, and they put on Alibaba. And and thousands, hundreds of thousands of millions of people are employed in China through these Taobao villages, simply because they have broadband and they're able to sell their services on that platform. We could be doing the same in Africa. So governments, I think, this is a moment for them to realize that they have to invest in broadband. And in doing so, it will allow us to leapfrog and find ways of developing our human capital and connecting our talent to opportunity in a much faster way than we otherwise would. And if you imagine a country that is struggling to educate its citizens or to provide decent healthcare to its citizens, pathway 1 is to spend the next 15 to 20 years slowly trying to build an education system and training teachers, and the teachers don't want to move to the rural areas, and you have this constant cycle. Or you can say, I'm going to develop broadband and perhaps even maybe consider outsourcing a good chunk of your education and healthcare to the best online high schools in the world, or the best online primary schools in the world, or the best online universities in the world. And can you get doctors from other parts of the world, from Philippines, etc., to be doing basic diagnosis for your population. So there's so many opportunities that can open up, which will allow us to leapfrog and build the services of the future, if we can address this bottleneck. But what happened in Africa is we can do things much like we did with the mobile phone, and how we develop mobile money, etc., like M-Pesa. If we focus and really understand the potential of technology, we can get there.
Have you got an example for us of one of these blended models of online distance learning that you're talking about, so that we can kind of picture it?
Yes, there's an example. For example, in California, there's a school called Holberton School that is training software engineers, and it's a school that doesn't have any teachers, and the way it works is that people, as they apply to the school, they're just given a set of, 80% of them had never done software engineering before. They don't have any background in computer science or anything. And they select people at the age of 18. They go through the application process, involves them being given just a set of materials online, which they go through, and they have to use the materials to figure out how to build a website. And when they do that, then they get admitted into the program. And during the course of the basic first 10 months, they learn to become full stack software engineers. By every single day at midnight, they release a set of instructions and a set of materials that they can learn by themselves. And then you're allowed to talk to your peers, because peer learning is a very powerful way of learning. If you have to explain something to someone else, it allows you to learn by yourself, and you don't need a teacher in the room. And day by day, they go through and they learn how to build software, and they've got an automated system that checks what they're building. And so it's completely project-based. There's no teachers, there's no exams. They're learning how to learn, and they're learning how to build things. And within 10 months, they're qualified, and they can do some specializations. And this school, they trained about 1,000 engineers in the last couple of years in the US, and they're doing it in Colombia as well, and they've started doing some in Tunisia. And they have a 100% placement rate within 1 year, and they're working there. Some of their graduates are working at Apple and Tesla and Google and Facebook and LinkedIn, and then they're earning significant salaries. The average salary that they're earning in the US is $100,000, and this is after they've been through a program with no teachers, right? And this is the kind of thing that can be done. We have a program in the African Leadership University in Mauritius and in Rwanda as well, and then we have this program in Kenya called ALX, which takes university graduates who have gotten academic qualifications, but they don't have the skills that makes them highly employable. And within 6 months, we're able to get them to world-class levels, and they're being hired by some of the top companies in Africa and the world. So again, it requires technology is one thing, but more importantly is the mindset. We need to change how we think about learning, how do we think about skill development. The other thing that's very important is that we need to also move beyond education and think about talent development. Education is only an input into how talent is developed. There's a lot of research shows that to acquire any skill, only 10% of it can be learned effectively in the classroom. 20% of it comes from what they call developmental relationships. We learn from your peers, from your mentors, from coaches, and so you have to build very powerful, networks. So the best blended learning programs are not just a collection of online classes. You have to allow people to interact, to build a community, intentional communities of practice where they get to engage with each other. And that's the 20% of your learning. Then the 70% of your learning of any skill or to develop your talent comes from doing, right? From experience. We learn best by doing, which is why that Holberton School example works so well, because every day they're building something. They're not just sitting in a classroom listening to a lecture. So today, most attempts to develop human capital and talent has been focused only on that 10% that you can learn in the classroom. So we need to understand that if we're really going to unlock our talent in Africa, we need to mirror that 100% model, not just the 10%. So include the 20% that you learn from your peers and your mentors, and the 70% you learn by doing, from internships, from work experience, and just on-the-job training. The Swiss and the Germans have always understood this, which is why they've got such a wonderful model of apprenticeship, that people leave high school and immediately start working 3 days a week and learning 2 days a week. And they're learning, they're working in insurance companies, they're working in banks, they're working for engineering companies like BMW and Siemens, etc., from the get-go, because they understand that you learn best by doing. So as we think about online learning, etc., we mustn't get we mustn't lose the bigger picture and realize that that's only 10% of the learning that they could get. And it's important, it's exciting, you can access it, it's now much more freely available. But we need to supplement it with the social capital that they need, and the peer learning, and then also the learning by doing.
Let's hold on to that thread of the 70%, and also thanks very much for making me feel better about never having gone to journalism school in my life. But let's hold on to this idea of the 70%, the social capital, the apprenticeships. But talk first about these Taobao villages in China, which reminds me of when the railroads started to open up the United States, and you would get villages which would focus on doing buttons and villages focused just on shirts. It reminds me very much of these Taobao villages in China. How is e-commerce going to change the paradigm in terms of employment, in terms of entrepreneurship in Africa?
Yes, I think that this is again one of those untapped opportunities that is ours to lose. One of the biggest constraints facing Africa has been access to global markets. I mentioned earlier that the way we're going to get wealthy in Africa is by producing products for $1 and selling it to the rest of the world for $10. Because if we're producing for $1 and only selling it in Africa, there's such low purchasing power that you produce for $1 and sell it for 50 cents, and then we'll just be exporting poverty from one part of Africa to the next, right? So if you look at China and India, this is how they've grown wealthy. They produce it cheaply and sell it to the rest of the world at much higher prices. And then you extract wealth from the rest of the world, but you're doing it legally. You're not going to steal, which is the other way you can get wealthy. So e-commerce, I think, opens up a lot of it opens up these global markets for African entrepreneurs and African products. But again, we need to invest in broadband. We need to create a generation of African talent that is thinking globally and that can build the e-commerce ventures of the future. Who's going to be the African Jack Ma? And how we're going to create the next African Alibaba and Amazon, etc. So one of the things, for example, we're doing at the African Leadership University is we recently launched a 3-month certificate in e-commerce entrepreneurship that we're doing in collaboration with Alibaba Business School to train Africans to be able to build businesses online and to be able to, how can we replicate what has happened with, for example, the Taobao villages in China. Many of the challenges that we faced before as entrepreneurs in Africa have been things like how to access the best talent to work for you. One of the challenges I've faced, for example, is getting work permits for my staff. In some of the different countries I've been operating in Africa. With technology today, I can build a global company without stressing about, where I can get access anywhere in Africa or anywhere in the world. Right now, for example, if I look at my technology team, I have a Ghanaian chief technology officer sitting in San Diego, California. I have a Malaysian UX designer who sits in Canada. I have 6 data scientists who sit in India, and 2 engineers sitting in in Russia, and a group of people sitting in Kenya. And that is our team, and we're working very, very well, right? So, now with technology, I don't need to worry about work permits for finding the best staff anyway. Similarly, if I want, one of the constraints has been, access to capital. You can incorporate your company outside of your country and access capital markets, there. You can, again, selling and looking at purchasing power. If you're only selling in Africa, you're really struggling with the limited purchasing power that consumers have. But if you're selling globally through e-commerce, then you have the global market, and you can, have much greater success in terms of ability for people to buy your products. So, but it requires Africans